We're live.
Here we go.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome.
Excellent.
Audrey, remind us where you're calling in from.
I'm calling in from lovely snowy Switzerland, from Zurich.
Ah, nice.
Where's everybody else? And what's the weather like?
In Melbourne right now.
I'm in Kiev.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm in California, so we're covering 4 continents, if I'm doing that correctly.
The whole world covered.
It's crazy.
Excellent. Well, hello and welcome everyone. This is a wonderful Duda webinar talking about Core Web Vitals. Hooray! Excellent. I would just like to welcome everybody. If you are new here, please, I encourage you to subscribe, to look and to hit the notification bell for all the new webinars that are coming out from Duda at the moment. We've got a wonderful series planned ahead, but of course today we are talking about Core Web Vitals with Andre Lipitez from Google. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Nick. And that was a great attempt at my last name. That was better than most people, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to blame that it's 5 a.m. here at the moment, so I'm just going to pull all the pieces together. But for everybody out there who doesn't know who this man is, he is a self-proclaimed Chrome Dino Wrangler, but also the Strategic Partner Manager and EMEA CMS Partnership Lead at Google. So thank you so much and welcome to the chat.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here and exciting to be talking to you all. I think I had my second thoughts when someone from Duda invited me to take part in this, but then when I was made aware of who's on the panel and what sort of people we have in the audience, hi Ammon, hi everybody, all my doubts disappeared and I was all over this. So I'm really, really happy to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm also seeing some really, really great names pop up in the chat as well. But we are also joined here, of course, with Alessia Koroba and Russ Jeffrey. So Alessia, to introduce you to everybody, if that's all right. But Alessia is an SEO entrepreneur, of course, based in Kiev, as she just said before. And she has a media advertising background, but really does prefer that strong, actionable stuff. A really wonderful technical SEO. Welcome to the webinar, Alessia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor. I'll be asking some interesting questions that many SEOs would like to have some answers.
100%. And of course, we actually have the man, the myth, the legend. We do have with us Russ Jeffrey from Duda. It's really, really lovely to have you on here, Russ. I might actually get you to introduce yourself if that's all right, just to change it up a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Russ Jeffrey. I've been at Duda actually over 10 years, kind of an expert in the web space, really familiar with Core Web Vitals. My day-to-day kind of job at Duda is on the lines of I run our app store and also work on product strategy for us. So kind of a wide range of activities.
Wonderful. And of course, we are talking about Core Web Vitals today. They are 3 main metrics that Google uses to be able to measure the user experience for websites. They are unique from each other, but there are more metrics that are really, really important for us to be able to be aware of as we're moving forward. We've had some really nice new updates to talk about this. And of course, without further ado, I might actually hand it over to you, Andre, just so we can get really into the meat and bones of this, and we can be able to get to questions. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will be addressing them at the end of Andre's presentation. So if you've got any burning questions on the table, think of them now, think of them while you're putting them in, and put them in that chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. And hi again, everybody. So I was really hoping with the couple of slides that I put together for us to just set us up for the discussion that will hopefully follow. So don't expect a full hour of boring slides. I don't know how boring they're going to be, but at least there's not going to be an hour of them, that's for sure. Now there's going to be the obligatory live event pausing of trying to share my screen that we've all gotten so used to over the last couple of years. Let's see if this works. Seems to work. God knows, maybe it'll even looks prettier with these black bars below and above. I'm not going to try to get rid of them. Don't fix what is working. All right, so this is me. As you said, I did profess myself to be a dino wrangler a while back when I first realized what the Chrome dinosaur was. If you don't know who the dinosaur is, try going offline one day and see how that experience works out for you in Chrome, and then we can talk again. This is very briefly what I want to cover in my part of the chat, and I promised myself to keep it under 15. Let's see if I can stick to that. It's just about 20 slides in there. Quickly, what Core Web Vitals are and where we are with them, right? If you haven't seen the technology report, I want to bring it up because it's generally interesting, but it's particularly interesting in the context of content management systems. And since today we are hosted by one of the world's leading ones in terms of Core Web Vitals, we should bring it up as well. There's some new stuff coming up, both in terms of the metrics themselves and how they're being used and where. So I'll briefly introduce this, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty of that afterwards. And the last point that I did spoiler a little bit in my sort of earlier video, inviting you all to join us, is why this is supposed to be important for you all, right? And I don't know exactly who is watching us, so we'll ask some questions as well. It'll be amazing when you're asking your questions if you introduce where you're coming from in this world. Are you purely from the search engine optimization side of things, or web design, or what are you, or what do you do? In fact, why don't you kick this off in the comments right now, just introducing yourselves to each other. That would keep you occupied while listening to me as well. Exactly. Get into those comments. Now for the brief recap. So what is even user experience and performance? Why do we need to talk about this? And what's important in this space? Again, this could be a whole full hour lecture. We're going to do this in 5 minutes or less. Number one, we understand, and this is not even on the slides, so kids take this down. This is going to be in the exam. UX has a material impact on your business performance. So behind every website is some sort of an organization or an idea that this website puts out there. It doesn't have to be business related, so it doesn't have to be commercial, but it has some sort of an end goal. And the user experience on your website has a material impact on that goal. We've known this for ages. This is hopefully doesn't, this is one of those axioms that doesn't require proof. It's just there, and we start everything from that. The difficulty was, and has always been, that user experience is relative. It has remained relative, right? For example, that hasn't changed. So it still is relative, and the user experience, even on the same website for people, and today we're a great illustration of this, coming from Melbourne in the middle of the night to California in the middle of the day, all sorts of things could impact the experience of a particular user from their device, their connection, and so on your website. Even though you would think that, wait, I know what my user experience is like, I see it, it's not going to be the same. We can measure it, you can measure it from your own device, you can measure it from a range of established servers to try to get a benchmark of how quickly do certain things happen, how well do they work. This is what we call lab data. That doesn't mean you take them to a lab somewhere and wear a white coat necessarily, but this just means that you are doing this purposefully in a reproducible environment. And after making, for example, changes on your website, you try to see what impact that has had on the experience. And then there's field data, right? So if you're not familiar with these two concepts, this is what this is all about. You do have lab, which is reproducible time after another and hopefully allows you to track changes, and field, which is what your actual users actually experience. And it hasn't been the easiest task to collect field data in particular previously. The need to be able to understand what your actual users experience and to translate this into actionable device has led to the creation of Core Web Vitals. That is the essential information that you need to understand. The Chrome team, the Chrome performance team, came up with a set of 3 metrics that they could put out there based on metrics that they've been using themselves for years to track internal Chrome performance. That are aimed to do 2 things, maybe 3. They're aimed at enabling you to actually clearly measure at least something about user experience, things that you can compare between your own website and other websites, or your own website over time. And secondly, measure them for real users. Find things that you could measure about the experience of somebody actually hitting your website, and things that a browser can understand, capture, and send back to you. This is the very background. I see Russ nodding. I'll take that as acknowledgement. Now, what are we measuring with the Core Web Vitals? We could be measuring a whole bunch of things when we talk about user experience. And in fact, we'll come to talking about some of the new metrics that might be potentially coming along. But the three initial aspects that we decided to focus on are, is it even happening? Like, what am I even doing here? Like, am I just looking at the spinner, or am I going to get to see some content at some point? Can I do something with the content once it's there? Can I scroll? Can I click? Because is it even happening? Is it responding to what I'm saying, to what I'm trying to do? You speak my language? And finally, the most importantly, does it spark joy? Or do you want to trash your computer, your phone, and the rest of your house while interacting with this website? In more technical terms, this is called layout shifting. So when you hit a page and it starts doing stuff as if by magic on its own without you touching anything, and you end up pressing all the wrong buttons because the content seems to run away from you. That, by the way, that doesn't spark joy. An experience that's in your control as a user, that you move forward or backwards as you like, is what you're aiming for as a web designer. And as if by magic, for each three of those stages, we have a metric that we can measure, improve, and compare. Largest contentful paint tells you if it's happening. So how quickly do you surface not just the first byte or the first pixel, but the first combination of pixels that could be meaningfully interpreted as the thing that the user came to the page for? I can already hear the chorus of your objections because I've been hearing them for the past several years. Yes, sometimes the browser gets it wrong. Yes, sometimes the largest doesn't mean the most meaningful or the most useful. But broadly speaking, based on empirical data, we try to get it right, and we do get it right most of the time. But the thing that, and that's why it's called not just the largest, but the largest contentful. The two are important. So it's the thing that has the content that the user is looking for, and it's the thing that seems to be the most important because it takes up the most space. When has it finished appearing on the screen? Could be the header, could be the hero image, anything like this. Second one, interactivity. After I click something, a tap, a button, anything else on the screen, how long does it take for the website to respond? Most of the time, actually, in fact, this metric is pretty good for most websites that are out there. But the thing that hampers it most of the time is if you have something blocking the main thread. If you have resources loading in the background and trying to do something while the website has already appeared, this is the thing that leads to rage clicking, if you're familiar with the phenomenon. If you're not, I hope you never come across it. But this means when you click on something, nothing happens. You click again, you don't know if your first click went through or what. You end up clicking 50 times, and then whatever it is that you're doing ends up happening 50 times. Eventually, or maybe never, or maybe you leave the website, which is what you would like to avoid people from doing. So, and finally, stability, right? The metric of joy. It's how much does the screen shift around without the user wanting it to shift? Ideally, that should be 0. It shouldn't shift at all. You want to keep it below a certain threshold. And the thresholds are a second important part of the metrics based on empirical data. And this is an important part here. We didn't just come up with these 3 and said, okay, well, here's where we're going to set the thresholds for good, bad, and the ugly. The Chrome team looked at literally millions of sessions and user behavior and put numbers that can shift in the future depending on how new data, what the new data tells us. But for now, based on the data that has been collected and is being collected, it tells us that, A, with these thresholds, we are ensuring a higher quality experience from the perspective of people staying and continuing to interact with the page. So if a page hits the thresholds of the Core Web Vitals as they are, you have a high likelihood of a user continuing to interact with that page and not abandoning it. And actually, people can move away from a page for good reasons, but we're talking here about abandoning it without having completed what they're trying to do. Second point about them that also comes from research. They are achievable. At least 10% of all the web pages that have been included in this analysis, and this, again, I emphasize it's actually literally millions of sessions, do achieve goodness across all 3 metrics. So this is not a bar too high or a bridge too far. This is a bridge that you can reach and hold. So it's possible to do, And therefore, the metrics are set where you can reach them. Of course, then when you also think you don't want to set it too low either, because if everybody is reaching that threshold, then the comparisons are meaningless. If everybody is good, then what are you comparing, right? So it does have to be exactly where some web pages are, slightly above some other pages, and well above some of the worst ones, but it gives everybody a clear and achievable bar to strive for. And finally, what we're also measuring, we're not measuring, so there's no confusion about this. Not all the sessions are taken into account. The outliers, so for example, with LCP, you can imagine sometimes for some reason it might take 10 minutes for the event to happen. That's an outlier. We're not going to look at that. But also you want to find a good percentile below which things are no longer outliers, but are just part of the tail of the bell curve. And with comparison, with iteration, with experiment, 75% was the cutoff point that we landed on. And it seems to be working quite nicely. Right. If you have questions about this, ask in the chat. However, I wasn't the one doing this research, so these two links should hopefully be quite helpful to you. It's both the science behind how Web Vitals were created and the methodology behind coming up with the thresholds. Hopefully this is helpful. I'm leaving you with a couple of seconds to maybe grab some screenshots or just write them down. They're relatively easy to find on the web.dev website. Second point, what tooling is out there? And then we're not going to go through all of them in any great detail. The most important thing that you've probably been familiar with for the longest time is, of course, your favorite Lighthouse, where you also have your SEO report, among other things. It has, it is, as you know, it's a tool present through many surfaces. That causes a little bit of confusion because, for example, people ask me, what's the difference between Lighthouse and PageSpeed Insights? And I can understand why. And there is no difference because Lighthouse is part of the PageSpeed Insights. It's served through PageSpeed Insights. Or look at it another way, PageSpeed Insights is the web interface through which you can query a server using the Lighthouse bot. But you can also query the Lighthouse bot using your own Chrome developer tools. So Lighthouse is what measures, is the tool that does the measurement. You can access it in different ways. You can even integrate Lighthouse into your development so that while rolling out things into production, you check the impact that they might have on your performance and your user experience. So there's all these tools out there. Important for you to remember that tooling is provided by many parties, by Google, but also nowadays by other parties. And in the context of Web Vitals specifically, what I would emphasize, try to ensure that your company has a way to measure user experience independently. So you have, it could be done with a third-party tool, but that you have all the data in your hands, because Chrome tries to give you as much data as is possible, but is limited by the need to anonymize data and by the lack of data for certain websites. So in order for you to get the most complete picture, make sure that you have your own measurement in place. You can learn lots more about this through web.dev in general, and PageSpeed web.dev is your starting point. This is where PageSpeed Insights lives now. So go there if you haven't been there before, and generally see what else is on the topic on web.dev. Now, the trickiest bit of the explanation when it comes to talking about Core Web Vitals with the search engine optimization community, but also the web development community. I've mentioned this, but you might not have paid attention to it, so I'll say this again explicitly. Core Web Vitals are a set of metrics that came out of Chrome. Remember me mentioning the Chrome performance team? It's the Chrome performance team that came up with the understanding that they need to produce a set of metrics based on their experience that web developers can apply to improve user experience. I'm not saying they did this entirely in isolation. I kind of hope they maybe had some kind of conversation at some point with the folks from search, but this certainly didn't come out of Google search. It's the folks from Google search that when they saw these metrics went, this is amazing. This is exactly what we wanted all these years. We tried to include page speed and not just tried, we did include page speed as a ranking factor before, but it was kind of a little bit non-transparent probably for the rest of the world because we couldn't properly explain how is it that we're measuring this speed. We're going to switch to using Core Web Vitals now because this is a much more understandable, transparent way to measure them. Plus, it has a whole bunch of tools that enables people to diagnose and improve. But again, to emphasize, Core Web Vitals are not a Google search initiative. I know very often it's hard to see the distinction between the various product areas within Google, but we internally, we try to be quite strict about maintaining clarity and sharing information on a responsible basis. So Google Chrome is not the same as Google Search. And the incentives those teams have are also quite different, right? Aligned, I think, to the extent that we're trying to serve the users in the best way possible. But it's important here that Search, for example, isn't the team driving the development and the future iterations of Core Web Vitals. They build on that and they use them. And this is why Core Web Vitals have been included into the page experience number of factors, right? So it's not just that. So the page experience thing is the search thing. This is where search comes in and goes, we got all these signals we used to have even before, the mobile friendliness and HTTPS and so on. And now, instead of just saying speed in an abstract way, we're going to say, well, it's specifically Core Web Vitals, which we're adopting from what Chrome has done. And I'm belaboring this point a little bit, but I think it's quite important for us to understand in the context of some of the future questions that will be coming up today. Now, some of the other things that I promised in terms of tooling and stuff around this. If you haven't seen the technology report before, the link is in very small font, as I now realize, at the bottom of the screen, but hopefully you can pause and read it afterwards. It's actually easy. It's good.gle, the Core Web Vitals CMS report. It was, I think, shortened by Rick Viscomi in the URL shortened to CMS report, because it was initially tracking mainly CMS performance. Now it has expanded to tracking performance across a lot of other technology platforms, including JavaScript frameworks and so on. But maybe for our purposes, a lot of you actually are interested in how different CMSs are doing. So it's out there. The CMS is on the screen for no particular reason other than Duda, whom I wanted to call out as our host today and doing particularly well. But also you'll find literally dozens of different CMSs there that we're able to detect, and we're able to detect them quite transparently using a third-party open source tool called Webalizer. If a platform that you're associated with is not detectable here, then you can easily edit the source code on Webalizer and get those changes committed, and it will be detectable. So that's easy. This is becoming, among other things, a factor to consider when you're thinking about switching a platform, choosing a platform for a new project. So pay attention to this. And I really love the fact that we have a transparent public way to look at this data now. A bit of new stuff quickly now. 3 things that I wanted to bring to your attention. One, a little bit on the search side again, although I do declare again, I'm not from Google Search, although some of you might remember me from the days when I was. Page experience as a ranking factor rolled out for mobile search first. It is now in the process of rolling. I think February got mentioned. Now we're in the middle of February, so it's either rolling out or has rolled out. Don't quote me on this. Go look up the official sources or ask John Mueller, better still. Rolling out on desktop as well. So to stop the conversations about, but what if my site is fast on desktop but not fast on mobile? Stop those discussions now. It's used across the board. You can track your experience, your user experience across both mobile and desktop using the tools that we described. Pretty much you can stop thinking about the 2 platforms differently now. Both of them are taken into account. Try to achieve excellence on both. The other 2 bits of news are about the metrics themselves. It was, from the very beginning, made clear that the 3 were picked because they enable us to provide a fairly comprehensive and independent view of the holistic user experience, right? So what I mean by this is we're covering all parts of a person's experience on the page, from the beginning, the load, the LCP, to the interaction with the finally loaded content in the CLS, and independent in the sense that while they are related, you can see how they're not immediately affecting each other. Right? Now, what was also clear from the beginning, that this was probably going to evolve. And there are aspects of the user experience that are missing a little bit, chunks here and there in between. We're not going to go into the technical details of either of these 2. There will be some links on the next slide that I invite you to look at in some detail if you want the gory technical details. But at a high level, what are we tracking here? Animation smoothness is that part of the user experience that we probably weren't capturing so well before. CLS covers it a little bit because it talks about content moving around, but that is, if you remember, that was about content moving involuntarily, so to speak. Animation smoothness is content moving voluntarily, and how well is it moving when you're trying to do something with it. Think of it that way, right? And responsiveness is you would say, well, we have FID. Why are we doing another thing with responsiveness again? FID, remember, it has the word first in the name, so it only measures the first input delay. How quickly can you begin interacting with the page? The new responsiveness metric isn't meant to replace it, but it's meant to complement it so that we can look at responsiveness across the lifetime of the page. Importantly, and you'll see this when you visit the links, neither of those have been finalized as of now, right? When are we talking? 15th of February, 2022. If you're watching this in the future, they haven't been finalized yet. And in fact, your feedback and input is invited for both of them. As you look at how they're done and you look at what they're aiming to calculate and you have ideas or comments on this, join the Web Vitals feedback group, for which you see the link at the bottom. Come in with your ideas, look at the feedback that other people have left. Maybe you'll pick up on some of those and see how that is interesting for you. I think it's very important to emphasize that I don't want to juxtapose search with Chrome so much here, but you understand that search is a proprietary product that Google tries to protect a lot for reasons that you are well aware of. Chrome as well, of course, is also being protected and is a proprietary piece of software that we're very proud of. But in terms of these metrics, they apply at a level even sort of a more fundamental level than Chrome itself. They apply at the web platform level. And so the way they are approached and the way we invite your participation is very different to what you might be used to when just thinking about interaction with Google search. So here, all of the development, or a lot of the development, happens out in the open where you can actively participate and it provides feedback. A lot of the code for this is available either in the Chromium repository or in separate GitHub repositories. So you can find it, you can provide feedback, and this is very important, especially with these metrics. The whole idea is that the Chrome team is moving towards improving both user experience, of course, but also your experience as site owners, developers, and optimizers in terms of understanding this and interacting with this. So get involved is what I'm saying. And finally, before we get to your questions and the first input from me on that should hopefully spur the discussion. Why are we even talking about this topic with the search optimization crowd? I'm kind of hoping that there's people from different walks of life watching us now and later, but I presume that primarily and predominantly there will be SEOs in the audience. You care about this insofar as you care about the amount of money the business that you're optimizing is making. If you don't, like, subscribe, and stop watching. I think this has been enough for you. But if you are not just temporarily involved with the project and you do actually care about its longer term success, and you do, for example, either as a gun for hire, you expect to get repeat business from the website, or as an in-house SEO, you actually do care about the long-term success of the company that you work for, there's no more fundamental reason than performance equals money. Better user experience equals more revenue, more profits. Exactly. Ranking, schmanking, traffic, schmaffic, all of this is secondary. Search believes that for now, it's a reasonable idea to use Core Web Vitals as part of a ranking factor. Good for them, good for us, good for you, good for everybody. Okay, fair enough. So it's a thing that's happening. It's not the fundamental reason. It's another signal that you can look at. Its impact on where you appear in search results, its potential second-hand impact on how much traffic you get. Okay, that's an interesting additional incentive that you might think of, but not the main reason. If those have been the main reasons why you were thinking about Core Web Vitals initially, I would encourage you to consider this from a different angle. It's not at this level of interacting with a search engine or another discovery platform that your performance matters and your user experience matters. It's at the level of interacting with your users that your user experience matters critically. And I know that very often, we can talk about this today, hopefully. Sometimes, not very often, but sometimes SEOs tend to stop thinking about the remit of responsibility at the click. Like once they landed on the page, I don't care anymore. That's it. That's what the marketing people and the web designers are there for. But I encourage you to actually think holistically about this, and it helps you to answer some of the questions that are cropping up in terms of how do you take Core Web Vitals into account while devising your SEO strategy, and how do you make sure that you're developing them in concert and not at cross purposes. User experience brings money. Bottom line. I can tweet these memes. I mean, somebody behind the scenes is making a great effort at calling them out. So this is more or less all from me. Make sure that you check out the examples of successful improvement of user experience as measured through Core Web Vitals at web.dev. So all the information is gathered under this tag, including case studies, but also a lot of developer materials. And let's keep talking today and later. That's all from me, at least in terms of one-way talking. And now I really want to engage with you. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Love that. I absolutely love that. And we had some really, really great banter on the chat as well. So I love this. And like, just going back to this, page experience in general is a factor, and that's something that Google has been really, really great at being able to put a lot of content, a lot of guides and things like that out there on the Webmaster blogs. And speed is really important part of someone's experience when using a website. A fast website generally means a better experience than slower websites. So, and that's kind of like going back to like actually good speed impacts your rankings in I think like two ways. Traditionally, speed impacting most regards to quality, and many of the resources that Googlebot will consume while trying to find every page of the website, and less resources that Googlebot uses, the more efficiently it has to be able to close on websites. And I think you put it really quite lovely, where it's like better performance, better quality equals better revenue. I am getting to a point of this. We've had some couple of really great common denominator questions from the chat. Alessio asked this question, but I might point to Doug Fowdy's, and again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering the names here, people, but his question is around like, how much does Core Web Vitals impact search? Are they mainly used for tie breaking when content is similar, or is there more? And that's actually also something that I'm really interested in, because I've seen that.
I think Martin has, and I don't think Martin needs a second introduction to this audience, has covered this in one of the Google Search office hours hangouts. I don't have it right in front of me, so I don't remember his exact answer. So I will redirect you there, and I will be very careful in answering search and ranking questions here today with you. But if you ask me, I see no reason to over-index on this as a ranking factor. I think if you're not watching yet the podcast that Martin, John, and the crowd have going on from Google Search, you should check out some of its episodes. And they have I think they've come up with this hypothetical search engine, which I believe is called either Steve or something like this. If anybody remembers, please. Yeah, Russ is nodding.
Steve.
It is Steve, yeah.
Right?
So let's say. So I will not talk about Google Search. I will talk about Steve. I think I'm allowed, right? Because I'm not an employee of Steve, so I can talk about Steve. So if I was Steve, I would not over-index on this over other meaningful factors, and I would indeed consider it as a very nice and transparent way to help everybody get on board with how we were thinking about, how Steve was thinking about the performance and speed before, but not fundamentally change what impact this used to have on Steve's ranking.
May I have my, because when the Core Web Vitals were first introduced, they were like a load on SEOs, and SEOs needed to go into them and study what it is quickly, because most SEOs, general SEOs, they are not very technical as such. And when they started learning about all these technical details and what influences and allocating their resources and budgets into the whole thing, many of them after some time got very frustrated, because they thought that the efforts that they put into like Core Web Vitals, they didn't pay off too well. Some of them did, yes, because you like have bounce rate reduced or some other good things. But how can a general SEO actually find this balance? How many resources should they invest in Core Web Vitals, and how many resources should they invest into content and tags and other things? So it's very, very hard actually for them to decide that, because they're not programmers, most of them.
Okay, so that's an amazingly great question. Thank you for that. It's spot on, right? Because I think it speaks to you're probably speaking for the vast majority of our audience when you're asking me this. Let me put it, I'm trying to find the best succinct way to put this. I would not want to encourage people to, even professional CEOs, to dismiss Core Web Vitals. let's use this as an opportunity. So to answer simply, I cannot give you a percentage, 20% or 15 or 35. But number one, probably not the vast majority of your resources in any case. Right? This is just one aspect, and we touched on this before in terms of what impact it has on ranking as such. Don't over-index on it. It's a part of the equation. So this definitely shouldn't be taking up all of your resources by any means, and maybe not even the majority of your resources. On the other side, use this, and we emphasized this before, use this, not just in the context of Core Web Vitals, but in general, but use this as an opportunity to encourage cross-functional work. God knows, inside Google itself, we try to do this as much as we can. We try to encourage cross-functional work, so different parts of the company talk to each other when trying to, or different parts of even the company, the same department, talk to each other more to make sure that they're aligned. Use this as an opportunity to talk to your marketing, to talk to your developers, to talk to your designers, so that if they haven't heard about something because they're sitting in their own silo, but you have been on the front lines and got some new information, you come up with a holistic strategy and you tell them, look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to spend 5% of my time on this because all I need to do is to make sure that this is actually working. But for you, for example, in terms of web development, I believe this is a huge chunk, right? And you need to have monitoring in place and you need to have tooling in place. And then if the web designer then or the web developer asks you, but why? It's not because it matters for our ranking, which is my responsibility as the SEO, but it's because it's your responsibility in terms of delivering great UX. And here are some examples of how Core Web Vitals impact great UX. So to the extent that as an SEO, you feel responsible for the overall performance of the resource that you're promoting, use this as an opportunity to improve the collaboration that you have in-house. And with or even if you're not doing it in-house, with the rest of the people working on the same project. That's how I hope, Alyssa, this answers you to some degree.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a great one. That's a great one. I might go to Armin's question. So Armin asked, and this is maybe just a little bit more on the cold face of things. Like when we're talking about Chrome user experience performance measured against other browsers that people may use, such as Safari, is it a bit of an accidental monopolizing of a side benefit?
Let me try to see if I can dig up that question in the comments. So yes, we get, so I guess monopolizing Safari. I'm trying to understand the essence of the question. Again, how carefully is Crux performance measured against other browsers? I'm not sure I fully understand it even after reading this myself. So let me, maybe you can fill it out, or maybe you can brief off the response that I try to give. Russ, you want to make a point?
Yeah, let me try and maybe synthesize the question a little bit. Well, let's just say, like, if we're just focusing on Crux and the public data that's out there, which is just from users of Chrome.
Yes.
Do you think that misrepresents maybe people who are using, Safari or their iPhone, or maybe they're a Firefox user? Do you think there's a drastic difference there? I guess, like,
so in simple terms, what we're saying is Chrome is telling you, for example, that your website is really fast, but in reality, the experience people might be having on Safari is entirely different. It might be quite slow, or in fact, might be actually much faster. To some degree, this is, I think, unavoidable. And yes, let's think about certain hypothetical situations. If your audience, and you can track this, you can track this, if your audience is predominantly not coming from Chrome on desktop or mobile devices, you need to find other ways to measure user experience. But this is why I was struggling a little bit with the initial definition of the question. There is no monopolization of side benefits here. This is more a question of Chrome trying to be helpful in terms of allowing you to understand what your experience is, where Chrome can see it. Obviously, where Chrome can't see it, it can't help you there. And so you need to rely on the other browser vendors to do it. And then coming to what search may or may not do with this data, search also only has access to the data that it has. Chrome is making, this is important, Crux, if some of you might not be familiar with the abbreviation, that's the Chrome User Experience Report. When users visit websites using Chrome, the actual data, the events are captured. When does the picture appear? How is it scrolling, and so on. However, they're not just stored willy-nilly. First of all, it's only captured and reported if the user has opted in. And secondly, it is only displayed and stored in public logs, so stored and displayed, if there is enough of it to be able to confidently anonymize it. So you're not able to identify individual users or even groups of users behind a specific website. This necessarily imposes restrictions on the kind of data that we're able to show. This is why I told you about the importance of tracking your own RAM data. But back to the original point. So Chrome, even there, is quite limited in what it is able to show publicly, but it does its best to show as much as possible while being respectful of people's privacy. And that's about, to my knowledge, the only public data set of this nature that is available out there, which is why Google search can go and say, hey, it happens to be a Google data set, but that's kind of neither here nor there. It's a public data set that's available and we can use it. If other browsers started producing data sets of this nature, that would be, I think, amazing. And it's not to me to say what search engines might or might not do with that data, but that would be awesome. So I guess what I can hope for is that building on the success, hopefully the relative success of Core Web Vitals as an approach to measuring user experience, maybe other browsers will consider doing something similar, and then we won't have this discussion. But the reasoning behind this is not that there is 5 different open data sets of this nature available, and Google search happens to prefer this one. It's just that there isn't another one. So they're using the one that's available, and I'm hoping that more ones will come online at some point. That's how I would look at this.
One thing I'll just add to your answer is at Duda, we actually track Core Web Vitals across all of the websites that we host, and we don't see a big drastic difference between browsers. We see roughly the same. Actually, Safari usually performs a little bit better because the devices are a little more powerful usually. So usually we see that, but it's not a huge drastic difference that we see between difference.
I guess Emma's point is that the specific events that are because of what happened, the browser is able to or not able to do is to say, well, when a thing happens, I will now put this in the logs. Now, the things that a browser captures or not captures are different across browsers. And so Safari doesn't do the same events as Chrome does. But you rightly point out, in Safari, there are other ways that you can approximate or try to measure performance also. And yes, and your point is also true. There could be interesting niche cases where we can analyze, for specific scenarios that maybe Safari users are also on different devices. Maybe you get Chrome users from desktop, but Safari users from iOS, and they will have entirely different user experiences. Fine, go ahead and measure it across those different places for your own purposes. And I don't believe it was going to have such a material impact on anything else.
That's interesting, because I think Chrome is still very much the majority of what people prefer as their primary browser. I think it's 60% of the market, and sort of maybe Safari is 20%, then Firefox is 5%, and then maybe of course followed by Edge, and then sort of everyone else kind of just sort of whittles down to the other percentages. So it's really, really fascinating. If you're looking at Google Analytics and you're looking at who's using your sites primarily, and you're seeing maybe Safari to be the primary users. Oh, that's very, very helpful. Oh, I'm not too far off. There we go, 63%, 15% Safari. It's fascinating to sort of think, okay, well, if Chrome is the predominant browser for most people, how much does it sort of align with other different browsers? How if we're going to put this much time and energy and resources, i.e. money, into optimizing our sites, is Chrome pretty much the best one to go after if maybe most people use Safari on their phones?
If I may, two comments I would make on this, Nick. I think in general, we can't disagree. With the data that we were looking at, it would be quite interesting to know what geography and what devices we're looking at, because I think you'll find that browser distribution varies widely across countries and devices, right? So I'm the last person to believe in a particular number allocated to Chrome usage. And I also firmly believe that the more the merrier, and it drives innovation and user experience when more browsers are involved. And then the second point is again, it's hard to get empirical data for this, but Russ just said so I'll go with what Russ said. If you get user experience right in one browser, you're very likely to have gotten it reasonably right in a different browser. It might be measured in a different way in a different browser, but generally speaking, it's not going to be horrible in one browser if it's nice in the other one, right? So again, there might be edge cases, clearly. I don't want to say it's always like this, but I think it sounds logical that if you got your Core Web Vitals right as measured by Chrome, you will not be that far off in the other browsers as well.
I'd add also that debugging in Chrome developer tools is very easy, and there are lots of tools that we can use, Performance Observer and everything else that will help us more. I don't know if that works with Safari though, but I think we have lots of handy things that we can use to help us with that in Chrome developer tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I might just switch gears a little bit and pull another question from the chat. So Wendy P asks, do we know when the responsiveness and the smoothness things that you discussed will be finalized, or are they already in beta?
I don't have. I think we'll know. Everybody will know more or less about the same time when the team announces it. The latest, so I checked while preparing for this, I checked the links. There's still no updates. They're generally speaking, so you can, maybe if you're that interested in that, bookmark those pages and check them for updates. Normally what the team does is they put an updated header. Well, if something changes to what they describe, so if something was initially written as if it's in testing, but then it went to production, they will actually say so. I mean, I don't have a definite date. In fact, I will tell you even more. I don't want this to discourage you too much, but in fact, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if they scrape this entirely and don't do this and do something else instead, if the feedback is overwhelmingly negative, let's say, right? Or at least not delivering what they expected it to deliver. So don't get too hung up on the two new metrics. Keep an eye on them. If you have material feedback to provide, by all means, please provide it. But also don't start overhauling your entire tracking process before you actually know for sure that these are being launched.
Audrey,
Awesome.
just a
no
follow,
sneak peeks.
yeah, just to follow up, I'd be interested to hear, if there's like a rollout process in place, or kind of a general practice, right? Like we saw Web Vitals was announced a year, or actually more than a year before it went into production. Like, do you think Google would put this into Lighthouse first and have tests there, or is it just too early to get into those type of scenarios?
Yes. In fact, if you check out Chrome developer tools that Alessia has spoken so highly of before, for which I thank you, you will already see that there's some ways to look at responsiveness in there. And I don't know if you were setting me up for this answer, for which I also thank you. Yeah. But in any case, so check out some of the things that most generally appear in Chrome developer tools. New things that come out in Chrome, you're generally able to debug and see them through the developer tools, which is what the developer tools are there for. Again, they might appear and then they might go away again. But at least if you want to play around and see what they look like and what the future might look like, that's a great place to check them through.
So are there any plans to recalculate them or add them to not only them, but other metrics into the Google Search Console? We have only 3 metrics there right now, so maybe you are planning to update that somehow and use them as well? Great question. I can't speak for the console. Again, something I will heartily invite you to ask Martin and John next time you visit them. It would make sense to me, I suppose, especially when the metrics become closer to being part of the canonical. I just said canonical. Look in the SEO hangout. How funny is that? Part of the canonical Core Web Vitals. You can then maybe expect search engines to start using them or exposing them through their consoles. But I don't know why they would do this before that. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. I think with the evolution of how Core Web Vitals has gone, throughout the years, canonical. What is something that you would really like people to be able to focus on for 2022? Are there sort of common denominators that you see all the time, and you're like, you know what, if we just maybe talk about, cache or something like that, is there something that you'd really like people to really, think about when looking at Core Web Vitals?
Great question. You put me on the spot there a little bit, Nick. Thank you. I like being on that spot. I think I'd like us, whatever we're doing, to go back to the fundamentals and the reason why they're there. The reason we have Core Web Vitals in the first place is because we care collectively about user experience. So maybe while thinking about what amount of your time to spend on COVID vitals. You're not thinking about what amount of resources to spend on them. Think about how much you care about the user experience part of the existence of your website. And if you take that approach, I think you will hopefully naturally find yourself asking the question of what do I use to quantify it? And you will hopefully find COVID vitals a useful approximation and a useful set of tools to get that. So yeah, like at the risk of sounding 20 years out of date, focus on the user, right? And then the rest will hopefully follow. And this hasn't changed.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I
got
think
more questions.
Yeah, like, may I come back to canonical this, because we were like discussing that in one of our communities here in Ukraine, and people started asking, I didn't know that question, AMP pages, do they refer, like the signals we take from AMP pages in terms of Core Web Vitals, do they canonicalize to the original page, which is not AMP?
Again, great question for Martin, and he's. I keep plugging that because it's a good for you guys. If you're not watching it, what are you doing? Like Martin's technical SEO office hours are some of the best. I still watch them now and again just for fun. I don't
He's
understand half of
hiccuping now.
I don't understand half of the stuff that he's saying there anymore, but I still like it. But so as not to leave this question entirely unanswered. What I do know is that log signals, so browser log signals, are collected at a URL level. Right? So Chrome knows what happened on a particular URL. Chrome, for example, doesn't know if it's a canonical version or an AMP version or what it is. It knows it's a URL, things that happened, I've collected them. That's all I know. This then gets, with the caveats that I've explained above, or before, rather, I don't know, look it up in the timestamps if we're going to bother with timestamps. This gets aggregated and published if there's enough data to publish. This is as much as I know and understand. After that, what and how Google Search does, that's a really interesting question. From what I remember from very old time ago, from a very long time ago, and when I was much younger and with many fewer gray hairs, the signals are generally taken from the canonical page, right? So with everything that flows from that, but I wouldn't go further than this part of the answer, which I understand is really fuzzy. So go grab your nearest friendly Google SEO spokesperson and then torture them until they respond. I did not say torture. I meant in the kindest way.
Oh yeah.
Tickle.
Have an engaging conversation.
Yes, there we go. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And not at all grilling. But maybe getting back to the way that we can be able to look at this stuff. I might take a step back to the page speed insights tool. Sometimes, like I've noticed, sometimes there's a bit of a gap between field data and love data, which is where Chrome user experience, where all people real devices are using it versus what you guys are actually simulating with the way that you analyze things. Just think about for people about what to sort of take away from this, because you guys test this in very strict testing conditions that you're trying to simulate. What is sort of your take on wanting to really have that really fast experience for those least powerful devices out there?
Oh, there's a bunch of elements to your questioning, right? Let's go with them one by one and then remind me at the end if I leave some of them out. So I think we started by talking about the gaps between lab and field data. I'll try to address this first. First of all, this is by design and unavoidable. And in fact, I don't know why you would want to try to avoid it, but even if you did, there's no way to avoid it because by definition, lab, as I said before, is ideally a reproducible experience. So you have the same, even to the extent that that's highly unlikely, but you try to have the same setup in terms of connectivity, device, and whatnot. And that if that produces discrepancies or changes over time, this actually indicates changes on the website itself, or the web page rather. Versus field, which is by definition coming from all sorts of users out there, from all sorts of devices and connections. You will never be able to, again, by definition, to reproduce all of them yourself. The whole point is that you don't need to reproduce them because you're getting this data collected from the outside. Of course, and the question is, why do I need lab data at all if it varies so significantly from the field data that I'm seeing? Then the question becomes, what sort of lab environment do you set up? And you can set up multiple ones, and you need to understand which ones you're using externally. So yourself, you can set up any lab environment you like. And I would, for example, encourage you to set up lab environments that maybe tend towards the median user experience that you're seeing out there. If your median user is on a certain version of an iPhone with a certain browser in a certain location, maybe that's the lab environment that you need to be setting up. Or if they're like on a Chrome browser on desktop, then that's what you should be going for. Like that should be where you spend most of your efforts when you're trying to set up this. When you go to an external service, be it web page test, be it page speed insights, be it any of the other external tools that are available that are trying to measure user experience, you need to realize that they will provide you one or at most a couple lab environments to choose from, but not an unlimited selection. So when you're looking at page speed insights in particular, you're looking at a 3G connection, I think low to medium sort of connectivity there, a specific device for laptop and specific device for mobile. And it might well be that these are widely different from your average user. So be conscious of this difference and take it into account when seeing what's going on. I see a little bit of conversation in the comments there talking about the scores, the Lighthouse scores associated with this. Remember that this is for a specific type of device. I would be careful setting yourself a specific threshold there, because if you know that your users on average or on median, you are in a way better situation than what the Lighthouse environment is, maybe that's the way you could look at it. You could say, well, I mean, if I'm getting whatever, 60 odd, 70 odd, 80 odd on Lighthouse, I'm safe because my users are generally in a better environment, on a better connection, on a higher end device. So they will get an even better experience. That's logical. And while I would still double check it, that's a way you could be thinking about this. But if conversely, most of your users are in the emerging markets on lower end connections with lower end devices, cheaper devices, or maybe poorer connectivity, they could in fact be getting a worse experience than your Lighthouse score. So your Lighthouse score could be 90 plus, and you'd be in a lab environment, you'd be flying, but your real user experience could still be quite poor, and there's still be room for improvement. So just remember where those differences are coming from and how to look at the environment that you set up yourself for testing and the ones that exist out there for you built externally. That was the first part of your question. Then we talked a little bit about, remind me, what was the second part?
The second part was sort of going around like the testing conditions and about having really fast experiences for those least powerful devices out there.
So again, if you can afford to have the best possible experience for the lowest possible denominator, good for you. This is, I mean, what's not to like in this setup. And from that baseline, adjust as necessary and as possible, depending on your resources and needs. Right? If you're trying, and it's quite interesting. I've seen discussions, I'll just bring this out of the left field a little bit, but it's been discussed out in the open, so we can definitely talk about it here. When the technology report first came out, comparing different CMS platforms, there's quite a bit of conversations about the prevalence of different platforms in different regions. So, for example, one might have a very large market share, or maybe even a dominant market share in the US, but a much smaller market share in an emerging country like Brazil, for example, and others vice versa. So it would feel like, on average, the ones with a larger market share in, let's say, Brazil would be disadvantaged because most of their users are having a slower connection, and then sort of by definition, even if the platform is amazing, they're having a worse time of it. And that is true. But I would disagree to saying that this is an unfair comparison, because that's actually what matters. If your platform is being used by users in those conditions, you need to be serving them. It's pointless to say, hey, in general, I'm faster than those other guys. Nobody cares. Your users care about the fact that what they're perceiving is not amazing. So if you've challenged yourself, and if you, as a platform or as an individual website, are addressing an audience that has constraints, you need to probably work twice as hard or X times as hard to make sure that you are kind of responding to those constraints and delivering an even better experience. Does that kind of address the general direction you were going, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I'm just really mindful for time. I think there's so many wonderful, great takeaways in there that will be really, really helpful to people to maybe even just go back and really just, think about that stuff. But as a bit of a final takeaway, Russ, what is something that you would like to sort of, close off when thinking about Core Web Vitals?
I really like the discussion that happened today, just around not trying to over-index on Core Web Vitals. If you're an SEO, I think your time is going to be better spent focusing on content and answering and trying to figure out what queries can I show up for, and not focusing on how do I change my Lighthouse score from a 50 to a 60, right, or a 50 to an 80. As long as you have a baseline of performance, your time is probably going to be better spent elsewhere. I really like that part of the discussion today. I think it's super relevant and super important for people to internalize with Core Web Vitals.
Love that. And Alessia, what would be your final takeaway with this conversation and your experience working on this year?
I'd just add a few words from myself, because when this whole thing, Core Web Vitals, emerged, after sometimes there appeared lots of tools, third-party services and everything like that proposed and recommended fixing all the issues with Core Web Vitals using themselves. But you should be aware that it's sometimes not such an easy process, and it's not that you can install some plugin and it solves everything for you. Some of the plugins and tools, actually, I've seen one that puts image placeholder instead of the original image into the source, and it doesn't get indexed and doesn't have impact on your content. So there are lots of issues, and you should be aware of them, and don't think that it's very, very easy. There's no easy solution usually.
Awesome.
Except for Duda. You can sign up for Duda and they solve that for you.
Love that.
It's not me saying that. It's great.
Awesome. And of course, as we saw from a performance perspective, Duda is looking absolutely phenomenal with the mix. Andre, any last thoughts on Core Web Vitals?
I think I've spoken enough. I would heartily second everything that Russ and Alessia said. In particular, Alessia's last point, not in no small part because it resonated with what I feel very strongly about. Use this as an opportunity to collaborate more. Like this example with the non-indexable images. If your web designer is trying to sort of cheat LCP by replacing the image that is making money and getting you clicks with a placeholder that doesn't do any of that stuff, have a conversation with them on how you can best work together to address both issues at the same time without sacrificing one in favor of the other. Like, learn how to start having those conversations. I found, for example, that our chat today has been absolutely tremendous and very enriching, and I can't thank you enough for having me here today.
Thank you so much for being here. I think a lot of really, really great things have been brought up, and I'm sure that people are going to be able to go back and have a bit of a re-listen to that. Just to close off on maybe just really, really quickly, I think I can't help but be actionable. Practicality, working with teams, making sure that everyone kind of understands like a basis of how to go all the way from the designer to the web dev to the SEO, to have better conversations around this stuff. I think also improve your hosting. That's a really great place to start. The gap between the white space is something you could be able to look at, and having that with a really nice, powerful host would be really, really great one just to keep in mind there as well. Thank you so much for everything. As a bit of a close off as well, I'm sure there is a lot of questions that we didn't get to. What is the best way to be able to find you guys after the chat? I'll start again with you, Russ. How do people find you?
You can email me at russ@duda.co, or I'm on Twitter as well, just Russ Jeffrey. Yep.
Excellent. And Alessia, how do people find you after this?
Can Twitter use as well, the best way.
Amazing. And Andre, how do people connect with you after this?
First of all, remember web.dev, your best friend, also pagespeed.web.dev, the second best friend. And as for me, I'm much less important, but you in my slides, you have both my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn account. So if you want to continue the conversation, I'm happy to hear from you over there.
Absolutely. Keep the conversation going on Twitter. Of course, my handle is actually my username at the moment as well, Nick Ranger SEO. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you so much to Duda, for providing a platform and an opportunity for all of us to be able to go through the, this with, with Russ, with Alessia, and of course with Andre as well. Thank you so much. Please, if you really like this, hit the like button. Please subscribe to Duda. There is a wonderful array of webinars coming through the fold.
Let me put it this way: if you don't hit like, we'll do this again, and we'll do this again until you hit like.
Amazing.
I'm down with
or
that.
Maybe when we get so many likes that we will have to do a part 2,
or maybe
part 3.
way.
Let's do it. Absolutely. And of course, hit the notification bell, because YouTube, Google is not great at being able to let you know when there are new things going on. But if you hit the notification bell and click all notifications, it will be able to tell you when the next webinar is coming to YouTube. Thank you so much, guys. Much appreciated for your time.